Hey everyone, hope you're having a great day. In this video, we're going to review round number 4 of the NRL, specifically from a betting perspective and taking away information that we can use to make really good betting decisions moving forward. Round 4 was a huge weekend for underdogs and also for games going under the total points line. Whenever I'm looking at handicaps or totals, I'm always basing it off the closing line right at kickoff. And then I also keep metrics of what the opening odds and opening lines were and how that adjusted, but we'll discuss that in another video. Purely looking at the closing lines though, we can see here overall this season, home sides are 18 and 14 against the spread and underdogs are 18 and 14 now against the spread. Last weekend, so in round number 4, the underdogs covered 7 of the 8 games. The Cowboys against the Raiders were the only favorite to cover the spread. Underdogs also won 5 of the 8 games outright. Only 3 favorites won in round number 4. They were the Broncos against the Dolphins, once again the Cowboys against the Raiders, and Manly beating Parramatta as huge favorites. Home teams won and covered 4 of the 8 games. And then we're just quickly looking at the overall ATS records, so against the spread records so far this season. Rabbitohs are currently the number 1 side, going 4-0 against the spread. 2 of those at home, 2 away. Importantly, 3 of those as an underdog. There are 3 other teams that are at 3-1. First of those, the Bulldogs, then the Warriors, and then also the West Tigers. So out of those 3 sides, only the Bulldogs were a top 8 side from last season. All the teams that have been covering the spread. So that shows us how much the teams from the top 8 last season haven't been performing as well as they were last year early on this season. And then from a totals betting perspective, so here we're looking at the totals. As I said, it was a huge week for the unders. 6 of the 8 games went under, and that's accounting for a lot of these totals that dropped down closer to game time with a lot of rain around last week. Only the North Queensland Cowboys versus Raiders game and the West Tigers versus New Zealand Warriors game went over the total. So they were the 2 games that went over, and they both only went over by a small margin. So far this season, that we have 2 big undersides. The Knights 0-3 to the under and the Rabbitohs 0-4 to the under. A total of 18 of the 32 games have gone under the total. Overside so far, it's only a small sample size with the 4 games for most teams being played. Raiders, Manly Seagulls, Panthers are the 3 biggest oversides, all with a 3-1 over record. And you can also use the table here to break it down whether those games are happening when they're a home favorite, away favorite, and I update this throughout the season so you can keep a record of it in the NRL bet finders. Plus, also go back and look at previous years. If you want to see this a bit more in depth, either check out the NRL bet finders or you can download the 2025 NRL betting guide, which has the history, and you can see how you can use this information from historical perspectives in that, because I have the records for each side over the past 5 seasons in that free betting guide. But we're here to review every game of the round so far. So firstly, looking at the Rabbitohs versus Panthers. Rabbitohs winning this game 28 points to 18 as 10.5-point underdogs. And it really was a game of 2 halves. You can see all 5 of those Rabbitohs tries all came in the first half. And then the Panthers, who trailed 28-0 at halftime, scored all 3 of their tries in the second half to try to mount like a little bit of a comeback. They scored 2 tries fairly early on, so both these 2 tries were in that first 20-minute period after halftime. And at that point, you thought, can Penrith make a real big push here and get this game close in the final 10 minutes? But to their credit, Rabbitohs defended really well and only conceded 1 more try, which was very, very late in the game. And the Rabbitohs held on for a 10-point win. For the Rabbitohs, they did what they needed to do to beat Penrith. They had 54% possession, completed at 82%, and they forced the Panthers to make over 440 tackles, which is quite a large number. That amount of tackles that the Panthers had to make, they were missing Cleary in fairness, but that number of tackles definitely impacted their ability to attack. When you're forced to do so much defending, you can see 443 to 310 tackles was the difference. Even though Penrith still defended well, efficiency-wise at 91.5%, just the sheer number of tackles just took away the amount of explosiveness in attack. You can also see the kick meters is a huge difference between the two sides from kicking meters perspective. In that first half as well for the Rabbitohs, that's where they completely dominated. They had 70% possession in the first half and completed 23 of their 25 sets, and also had 32 plays inside the Panthers' 20-meter zone, and were also leading the penalty count 5-0 during that first half. So pretty much, as I said, game of two halves. Rabbitohs absolutely had everything go their way in that first half, and they took their opportunities. They converted that sheer weight of possession and opportunities into points to put up a winning score that the Panthers weren't able to bridge back. For the Panthers, they really did take themselves out of the game early. They had to make 221 tackles in that first half compared to the Rabbitohs just making 92, and they only had the 12 sets compared to the Rabbitohs 25. They made 6 errors, conceded 5 penalties, and when you're down 0, trailing by 28 points, it's a long way back at halftime, especially without those key players, and it was always going to be an uphill battle from that point forward. I think for the Panthers defensively, once again, they haven't had the best few weeks defensively to start the season. They improved it, though, in the second half, but that also could be an element of the Rabbitohs playing for full time and trying to hold on to their margin. For the Rabbitohs, they're going to be looking to go 4-1 this week when they play the Roosters on Friday night. That sets up a good game for them. And then the Panthers looking to avoid losing 4 straight games when they play the Cowboys also on Friday night this week. The first game on Friday night was the Roosters against the Titans. Another big win by an underdog with the Titans running in 30 points in this game. So 5 tries, 4 of those converted, plus a penalty goal, keeping the Roosters to just 2 tries. This was a very low-scoring game in the first half. You can see just the 2 tries, 1 for each side in that first half, 6 all at halftime. But after halftime was when the floodgates tended to open in this matchup. Titans ran 4 tries to the Roosters, just 1 in the second half. Important to note, the Roosters did take a lead early in the second half when Dominic Young went over and it was converted, so they're leading 12 points to 8 before the Titans ran in those 4 straight tries in the final 20 minutes of this game. For the Roosters, they made a lot of mistakes, 19 errors in this game. And in fairness, it was played in tricky conditions, but still 19 errors. It's near on impossible to win games regardless who you're playing against when you make that many mistakes, and only a 57% completion rate. And a lot of those were also coming in the second half, especially also with the Titans completing at 81%. We've got a huge difference, and 18-point margin does kind of reflect the difference here in the mistakes that the two teams made. Overall, for the Roosters, though, they still did generate 6 line breaks, 43 tackle breaks. So they were a bit more polished in their attack and didn't make as many errors. Then this game could have been very, very close. Defensively, though, the Roosters were pretty good. Even though they conceded 5 tries, they only missed 26 tackles. So the Titans definitely took a lot of their chances when they were presented, and it's a tricky matchup for the Roosters against the Rabbitohs this week. Titans overall did what they needed to do as an underdog in a similar fashion to how the Rabbitohs beat the Panthers. They kind of followed a very, very similar game plan. Complete their sets well, force the opposition to make mistakes, and take your chances when they're presented to you. One important thing that I want to note for the Titans here is defensively on their goal line were good this week. So back-to-back good defensive performances from them against the Knights the week prior, now again against the Roosters. The Sydney Roosters had 37 plays inside 20 meters of the Titans try line. And so the fact that they only scored 2 tries is definitely a credit to that Titans defense. There are also a strong chance that this week they face their Queensland rival in the Redcliffe Dolphins back at home. So a good chance to put 3 consecutive wins on the board for Gold Coast. Later game on Friday, Dolphins against the Broncos. Broncos ran out 8-point winners in this game, and it was a game where they were pretty much in control for the most part, and you didn't ever really feel like Dolphins were going to win this game, but they were doing well to keep it close enough. One of 2 games this weekend where a late try determined which way the spread went, with the Dolphins ending up covering the spread. So 3 straight underdogs to cover to kick off the round. This was also played in tough conditions. The Broncos scored 3 tries to 1 in the first half to lead 16-6 at halftime. And then just the 2 tries in the first half, but Shibasaki's try shortly after halftime, kind of midway through the second half, kind of put the margin beyond bridging for the Dolphins. And they scored a late try through Avarillo, but by that point, the game was all but over. Probably a controversial moment in this game where the Dolphins should have gotten a 40-20 call, but it was missed by the touch judge. Could have potentially changed how this game was played late in that second half. But Broncos put another win on the board to go 3-1 on the season. Both sides did miss 42 plus tackles in this game. Dolphins missed 46, Broncos missed 42. In fairness, it was tough conditions. Most of this game was played in quite significant rain, but still very, very high numbers for both sides, but definitely a low error count for the Broncos. Looking at the Dolphins, first of all, statistically, like they almost should have won this game. But they just failed to convert their chances, which has kind of become the pattern for Redcliffe so far this season. They had 53% possession in this game, completed at 80%, and had 36 plays inside the Broncos' 20-meter zone. But similar to the Roosters, they only scored the 2 tries from their opportunities. Dolphins also led the penalty count 5-2 and had 5 set restarts go their way to just 1 for the Broncos. So most calls in this game were going in favor of the Dolphins, but it wasn't enough for them to get over the line. They faced another Queensland rival, as I mentioned, on Saturday when they play the Gold Coast Titans, who are coming off those back-to-back wins. And it only kind of gets tougher from there for the Dolphins. They'll play the Panthers and Storm in the 2 games following that. So really, really tough start to the season for Redcliffe. The Broncos in this game did well to score 4 tries with limited field position. And one concern I have a little bit is they completed 89% of their sets, but didn't have great field position in this game. They only had 9 plays inside the Dolphins' 20-meter zone, but still scored 4 tries. Did very well, and like this 89% completion rate was very, very good in the conditions that this game was played in. Defended their goal line well. As I said, Dolphins had plenty of ball down that end, but Broncos did well to hold them out. They have another home game coming up this week when they'll face the Tigers on Saturday night. He'll be keen to bounce back. Then we have the Dragons and Storm, third upset or underdog win of the round. The Dragons winning at around the $3 mark against Melbourne, giving them their first loss of the season. This game was very, very low scoring. There wasn't predicted to be too much rain during this matchup, but that turned out to be incorrect. And the Dragons scoring 2 tries to the Storm's 1 in this game. And it was a very, very good performance from the Dragons, especially defensively. You could tell that Melbourne were really missing Jerome Hughes, but they also didn't make the most of the chance they had, and Dragons defense definitely shut them down. This game at halftime, the Storm went in after Ryan Pappenhausen scored just before halftime. That gave the Storm an 8-6 lead at the break. No tries for the first 27 minutes of the second half. Jacob Little crashed over from dummy half, which turned out to be the game-winning try, and the Dragons held on in that final 10 minutes. This made it back-to-back wins for the Dragons against the Melbourne Storm after beating them last season, and also their first win of the season coming off the bye last week. For the Dragons, they defended their goal line extremely well. Melbourne had 46 plays inside the 20-meter zone, including 31 of those in the first half, but the Dragons kept them to just 1 try, which Pappenhausen scored came from a play that started about 30 meters out. Elise Katoa broke through and gave the offload as he was being tackled, and Ryan Pappenhausen was there to take it and run it in to score. Overall, it was just a very, very even game. There wasn't much between the 2 sides. A lot of these metrics are very, very even and not a great deal between the 2 sides. The Storm probably took a little bit more risks and turned it into slightly better field position and more attacking opportunities, but it was not enough to get them over the line. and just turned out to be a crash play from dummy half that ultimately was the difference between the two sides. For the Dragons, they get the chance to post back-to-back wins. They play the Eels on Saturday afternoon this weekend. Now, for the Storm, they tried to rely on their defense to win this game, which is what you need to do in these conditions, and they defended well, 92.5% tackle efficiency, only 22 missed tackles, conceded just 2 line breaks in this game. All those metrics, I think they'll be very, very happy with. But it was just their attack that there was the problem, especially close to the line. Melbourne also led the penalty count 9-4. As you can see, the Eels conceded 9 penalties to the Storm's 4. And that trend, which I spoke about early on in this season and going back through last year, teams that give away more penalties win games. So you definitely don't be afraid of sides that are just giving away penalties. That's holding true again this season. I think the Storm, though, they'll be disappointed that they didn't take their chances close to the line. Those 46 plays they had really should have resulted in points. Dragons haven't been a great defensive side so far this season. So I think it's a missed opportunities for the Storm. They're on the road again this week up in Sydney once again and will face the Manly Seagulls. Next game on Saturday, they went up to Townsville with the Cowboys posting their first win of the season, beating the Raiders 30-20. This was the first game to go over the total this weekend, and it was also the first favorite to cover the spread in the Cowboys. Cowboys ended up starting this game very small favorites. They scored 3 tries to 1 in the first half and led 16 points to 8 at halftime. Then they also scored early in the second with Robert Darby going over in the 47th minute. That gave the Cowboys a pretty significant buffer. They were leading 22 points to 8 about 10 minutes into the second half. Then Xavier Savage scored a very good try from a kick or a bomb downfield, and he got there, jumped over Drinkwater, collected it, and scored. Raiders went in again about 10 minutes after that in Tamale, and from there, it was a very, very close game. They also bombed a try where Xavier Savage made a break down the right side, then elected not to offload and was cut down by Drinkwater. That was probably a very, very pivotal point in this game that could have made the result go a different way. The sin bin to Cohen Hess, the Raiders didn't really take their opportunities. They had 10 minutes where he was off the field and they had a man advantage, and they only managed the 1 try during that period. Which was at the 63rd minute, so late into that period of time where he was off the field. Really, overall, this game, that final 25 minutes from the Cowboys was what got them over the line. That was the crucial moment where they could have lost this game. It was really in the balance with about 20 minutes to go, but they did very well to hold on and win, get their first win of the season. Raiders now lost back-to-back games, both of those on the road. They go back home this week to face the Sharks. But for this matchup, the Cowboys' attack looked a lot better. They made 9 line breaks, and previous weeks they've only made 3, 2, and 2. So huge improvement from that perspective. They had a lot of success going to that or their left edge. That was very, very successful early on in the game. 4 line breaks with most of those coming down that side. Did extremely well defending their goal line, as I mentioned, especially in that second half. The Raiders had 30 plays within inside that 20-meter zone, and the Cowboys were also down a player for a 10-minute period. So great overall effort and a much improved effort by the Cowboys this week. Important game for them just to play as well as they did this week. Again, next week when they face the Panthers, who will be desperate for a win to avoid losing 4 straight games, and that game will be played down in Sydney. So tough road trip, but Cowboys at least have some confidence after this game. For the Raiders, they did have their chances and could have won this game. Their right edge defense was very, very lackluster, especially in that first half, and I expect teams to look to take advantage of that moving forward. Did have their chance to overrun the Cowboys late, and honestly didn't really make the most of their chances when the Cowboys were down a player and just made too many mistakes when it counted. They're back at home this week on a quick turnaround, only a 5-day turnaround from the Saturday to the Thursday night, and they'll play the Cronulla Sharks, who went around in the late game on Saturday, so they're also going to be on that 5-day turnaround, but not having to travel from Townsville, where the Raiders are coming from. For this matchup, Bulldogs winning as outright as the biggest underdog on the round, or the biggest underdog to actually win. and winning that game 20 points to 16. And this turned out to be a really low-scoring game in conditions that were the best conditions of all, or aside from the Raiders game, but the best conditions in Sydney we saw all weekend. And it was still a very low-scoring game. Bulldogs led 8 points to 6 at halftime. They scored 2 tries to 1 in the first half, and that was the only points the Sharks scored for the game, those 6 points. And the Bulldogs scored 2 converted, unanswered tries in the second half to win the game 20 points to 16. For the Sharks, they ended this game with 45% possession, so a low number, even though they completed at 80%. Think for this game, like the Sharks just weren't at their best in attack, and the Bulldogs defense really stood up. And overall for the Sharks, they made 14 errors in this game to the Bulldogs, just their 8 errors. And even though, Sharks won the penalty count 10 to 6, it wasn't enough. They just couldn't take their chances when they had opportunities. Bulldogs defense just kept on shutting them down. And Bulldogs last season, they built their success on their defense, and looks like it's continuing to improve overall this season, especially at the moment. Thing for the Sharks, their goal line defense also was a bit of a problem, especially on their right side. Every time the Bulldogs went to their left, it looks like they were cutting that Sharks defense to shreds and doing it very, very easily. So not the best performance from the Sharks. I think they'll be keen to bounce back when they face the Raiders on Thursday night. For the Bulldogs, it was a strong game overall. They did all the right things in attack, completed at 85%, so 41 of 48 of their sets, and made 6 line breaks and really executed well close to the line, and also defended very, very well. Think the Bulldogs were a touch lucky to only have that one sin bin to Tupanua, which was at full time, basically as the siren went. They were lucky that they didn't get one earlier on in the game with multiple reports coming out of this matchup for the Bulldogs. But now the only undefeated side, they're 4-0 on the season, and they don't play again until Sunday night, where they'll play the Knights, and then following that have their first bye of the season. On Sunday, the first game, the Seagulls won as the biggest favorite of the round, 26-12 against the Parramatta Eels, who is still yet to win a game, 4 tries to 2. The Seagulls kind of just got an early lead. They scored 2 tries through each winger. Jason Saab and Lehigh Hapuati both went over in that first 15 minutes or so. They led 12-0 after a penalty goal by Ruben Garrick 20 minutes into the game. And from there, they were kind of in control for the most part. And it was a game that it was just going to be very difficult from that point. Like the fact that the Seagulls got the jump on the Eels, which has kind of been the pattern for how both sides have played this season. It was a bit of a long way back for Parramatta, especially when the rain hit in the second half. Joe Offengawi crossed and charged through next to the post about 15 minutes into the second half, and that gave Parramatta a little bit of hope. They were only down 14 points to 6 at that stage. But then the Seagulls responded quickly, back-to-back tries within a 5-minute period, both converted. The margin blew out 26 points to 6, and then the game was all over. One probably interesting factor from this is Seagulls were a 16.5-point favorite. Up until the final 10 seconds, they were covering the spread, but chip and chase or kick over the top and collected by Sean Lane ended up in the Eels covering the spread. So anyone involved in the line on that game came down to that final play, which is something that I talk about in the NRL best bets, being very, very cautious of laying too many points in the NRL, especially once you're getting into that double-digit range, and looking for ways to get around doing that and still getting value in the bets that you're taking, because obviously, teams just need to win games. They don't necessarily need to win by certain margins until it gets later in the season, where for and against becomes more of a talking point, depending where you are on the ladder. And so it's not always the greatest situation laying too many points, especially when it's tricky conditions. For Manly, they played exactly how you need to play to beat lower tier opposition. They had the majority of the possession, completed 86% of their sets, made 6 line breaks, kept the Eels to just the 2 line breaks overall. And they were able to just coast a little bit in that second half, where the Eels made 9 errors in the second half, and Manly were just able to go through the motions and do enough to get over the line. The injury to Tom Trbojevic is probably the biggest thing out of this game and does raise the question whether it was worthwhile him playing in this matchup against Parramatta, especially now he's going to be out for the next month where Manly will play the Melbourne Storm next week, Cronulla Sharks, St. George Dragons, and then the Penrith Panthers. All four of those games are tough matchups with the way those other sides are playing this season. So they're going to need to do well to get through this period. For Parramatta, they're still chasing their first win of the season. They'll face the Dragons next week on the 6-day turnaround. But for Parramatta, they gave away an early lead once again, down 12-0 in the first 20 minutes. And from that point, you're playing catch-up, trying to get your way back into the game. Overall, their attack's still struggling and to generate field position through the middle, Manly controlled the meters gained, but importantly, the post-contact meters. This gives you a better indication on the forward dominance of either side. They're just going to have to give themselves better field position, especially without Moses in the side, to be able to post more points. And they've kind of gotten this little bit of habit of scoring points very, very late in the game. I would say it was a solid defensive performance by Parramatta, considering they only conceded the 4 tries and still, 26 points. But from what we've seen in the first couple of weeks compared to the last 2 weeks when they played the Bulldogs last week and now against the Seagulls, I think the Eels' defense has been better. So I'm giving them a small tick for just an improved defensive performance, and it'll be interesting to see how they go against the Dragons this week. Final game of the round, which was probably the most entertaining game of the round. 50 points scored, it went over, and the Warriors also won this game outright as an underdog. In the first half, teams went back and forth with tries. Warriors in first, closely followed again by the Tigers, who responded a few minutes later. Then the Warriors went over again shortly before halftime, but a quick response by the Tigers. That took the teams into halftime, 12 points all. The trend kind of continued straight after halftime. Metcalf went over in the 41st minute. Then the Tigers responded, but this time they responded with 2 tries to take a 24-18 point lead with just under half an hour to go in this game. From there, we had close to about a 15 to 18 minute period of no points, and the Tigers were looking like they were going to hold on. They had a 6-point margin. They were defending well, but just a few minutes of lapse in concentration defensively. Warriors took advantage, scored a good try, a long-range try with a break down the right edge, and then that was shortly followed by a long-range penalty goal by Luke Metcalf to put them 2 points up, and the Warriors were able to hold on and win the game by 2 points. I think for the Tigers, they'll be a little bit disappointed they let this game slip away. Overall, it was a very, very even matchup. If you go through the stats, there's not a great deal between the two sides in a lot of categories. However, the Tigers were constantly playing on the back foot for 2 reasons. Middle of the field, Warriors once again dominated sides and dominated the Tigers through the middle, gained almost 500 additional meters, over 2,050 for themselves, 654 post-contact, more than 130 more than the Tigers. Then also the kick return meters. Warriors had 206 kick return meters to the Tigers, 77. So they weren't getting great field position from their kick returns. You can also see 47 meters per set compared to 38. These are key numbers that allow the Warriors to score not only 26 points, but be one of the first sides to put up a score against the Tigers so far this season. This was the Tigers' most points conceded that they've had so far. But then also, the Warriors won the penalty count once again for the 4th straight game this season. They got 8 penalties to just conceding the 5 overall. I think for the Tigers, they won't be, as much as they'll be a little bit disappointed, I think there's still a lot of positive signs for them off this performance. This week, they travel up to Brisbane to face the Broncos, which will be a very, very good game between the two sides. For the Warriors, they'll be very happy. 3 straight wins since returning from Las Vegas. The first 2 at home, then 1 on the road. They have the bye coming up this week. That gives them that chance to reset, which I spoke about at the beginning of the season. Then they have 2 tough games against the Storm and Broncos following their bye. And I think those 2 games could shape the Warriors as to whether they're a genuine top 8 contender or they'll be just outside the top 8 this season. If they can win 1 or 2 of those games, they're definitely going to be a side that dramatically exceeds expectations this season. So that's my look at all the games from last week. I'll be posting a preview for all the games for round 5, where we look at the betting trends, who's been winning, who's been covering, have their games been high scoring, and the information we can take from that to make our betting decisions for round number 5, and also a try score analysis video looking for the most likely try scorers in round 5. So stay tuned for those videos coming up this week. You want to use the NRL bet finders to research the games and find your own bets. I'll put the link to those in the description. That's also where you can see everything I'm betting on the NRL as well. Thanks guys for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you like videos on the NRL and you want to make money betting, and I'll see you in the next video.